One of the key discussion points in blockchain and cryptocurrencies to take place, in fact, I think Manisha in the previous session mentioned it, with regards to a crystal ball, is around the evolution of money, and more so, where does money going to stand as we enter the next decade? What will it look like in 2030, literally 10 years from now? Will cash and coins go to the way of like a floppy disk or laser disk, long forgotten as an object, memorialized only as an icon? Will we see a shift away from national currencies towards maybe a more global common settlement asset, like one currency for the entire world? What does all this mean for you, for I, businesses? How will it change the way we live, work, and play? On this panel right now, we've got three very distinguished gentlemen, experts and friends of mine, if I can say so. And leading this discussion, the person who will be introducing them will be none other than Joanna Ossinger from Bloomberg. And the theme will be around digital money 2030. Joanna, over to you right now.
Thanks so much, Gabriel. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Blockshow's Digital Money 2030 panel at the Singapore Fintech Festival. I am Joanna Ossinger. I'm a global markets editor and Asia crypto czar at Bloomberg News. And I'm truly looking forward to this panel discussion with three great speakers on a topic that will have massive ramifications for the entire world. Even though none of these people needs much of an introduction, let's just do a brief one. Gigi Levy Weiss is one of the most prolific technology investors in Israel. He's been a CEO, advisor, and board member at numerous companies. He's on the board at Bertelsmann and sits on the Facebook Advisory Council. Tim Grant is head of Six Digital Exchange, having been appointed earlier this year. He has more than 20 years of deep technology and management expertise across institutional capital markets and enterprise blockchain businesses, and spent a decent chunk of time at UBS. And then we've got Changpeng Zhao, who everyone knows as CZ, the CEO of Binance, the world's largest crypto exchange by volume. Okay, so we've got traditional fiat currencies, and now central bank digital currencies are looking imminent, plus you have crypto. So is there any system that we think, over the next 10 years becomes dominant, or anything that really loses out? CZ, do you want to start?
Sure. Thanks for having me here. And so I personally think anything could be possible. And basically, my personal approach is not really to predict which one's going to win or not. We try to facilitate liquidity, and we provide a marketplace for anything that's available. So ideally, we hopefully should be in a situation where there are many central bank digital currencies that are probably issued by governments or central banks, and they probably will have certain level of restrictions on them, just as current fiat currencies. And we should have a relatively large number of decentralized currencies like Bitcoin, other cryptocurrencies, and hopefully people can exchange them relatively freely. And hopefully people can do it on our platform or similar platforms, similar exchanges. So that's kind of my view. I think there's a lot of currencies in the future, and all of them are probably going to be digital.
Okay, interesting. Tim, what do you think?
Well, look, and firstly, it's great to be here. And as much as it says I'm in Switzerland, I'm actually -9 degrees centigrade here in New York City, hence why I'm looking all bundled up at the moment. COVID has struck again. So look, I think it's been a fascinating journey already. If you start at the beginning of Bitcoin and Satoshi Nakamoto's paper, and the idea that underlie that, the general idea that we want a freer, more open method to exchange value is clearly something that we all want. And I think nobody would not put their hand up and say, why wouldn't we want that? And I think the experiment that is Bitcoin that has thrown off so many successes in different dimensions, and ultimately many of us on this panel are really spending a lot of our time focusing on that in one way or another. It's been a real kind of revelation, I think, to society. So the big question is, where do we go from here? We've had this 12 years or so since Bitcoin came into place. Now we're starting to see a really big institutional shift, not just a retail play, not just a sort of libertarian ideal, but actually a very significant wholesale institutional shift of the largest institutions in the world, and the central banks and regulators all paying attention. I think now, as we move into this decade, we've got a very exciting new a new phase that we're entering into. I would agree with CZ that there will be, I would imagine there will be central bank zero currencies. That's something we're working on at Six Digital Exchange with the Swiss National Bank. And there are many other really good efforts around the world, not least Project Ubin, which I was a part of right from the beginning. But I think CZ is also right that there are these new currencies, stores of value, these digital formats that are coming out. I mean, in the preamble there, they're asking, are we going to have coins and notes? I think the days of coins and notes are clearly numbered. We live in a digital economy, and it's only going to accelerate. But the big question is, where do we end up in 2030? Is it one global currency? Is it a bunch of different currencies? Is it really the same economic and political environments today? Therefore, it's the same, even though it's basically the same kind of monetary system, but things are digital. That's where things get interesting. And I'd like to think that we can really use this stepping stone that we've had in the last 12 years since the advent of Bitcoin, which has really opened up our minds, and kind of leave the dominant logic of the 20th century where it belongs, which is in the 20th century, which is that, you know, politics and geopolitics need to evolve, economics and economic models need to evolve, and businesses need to evolve. And the classic sort of business structures of the 20th century, I don't think are going to last in the same way. I think banks, intermediaries, financial market infrastructure players like Binance under CZ and like Six Digital Exchange and other similar efforts, you know, they all have to change. They all have to change. And Gigi, you're working with Facebook. That's a big piece of the puzzle as well. How do these kind of efforts factor into this next phase? It's fascinating stuff.
Definitely. Gigi, what do you think?
Yeah. So to start with, of course, the one thing I have to agree with is CZ's comment that everything is possible. That's the cornerstone of everything I do and everything we try to do. And so that I agree for sure. I think there's a big mix-up between what is essentially two different things. There's digital currencies and there's decentralized currencies, and they're not necessarily the same thing. And then clearly some of them would be used for store of value, and some of them would be used for means of exchange. And that's also two separate things. And so I think that there's something that are clearly happening that there's really no question about. I think that cash is disappearing. I think in Northern Europe, we're already at less than 2% cash and going down. I think that in a few years, it's expected to be at 0.5% of transactions, aiming towards zero, led by the government, of course. And so being that we're getting off cash, the governments have no choice other than going to digital currency. And so central bank's digital currency is a fact. It's going to take some more time. They're going to make sure that it's QA'd well, of course, for obvious reasons. But I have no doubt that this is a direction that we're going to see happening for every country. Then that's one direction. And then the second thing, which is the store of value, well, you know, when you look, for example, at 20% of the dollars in the world being printed the last year, as I'm sure you guys are aware of, and think about, is this a good store of value when somebody can decide to just add 20% just because they need it? What does that mean about my value? And so we're seeing Bitcoin mostly as a store of value start flourishing because many more people are looking at it as a digital gold. Essentially, it is not controlled by any government. It can't be inflated or deflated. There's no way to manipulate it in the long term other than general supply and demand, which means that it could be a better store of value. And then, you know, whether it's going to be one, as in Bitcoin, that is gaining momentum, especially I think after the PayPal announcement, or it's going to be more, as CZ said, which, you know, I don't know, but my feeling is that the coming few years are going to be mostly Bitcoin around that rather than more. And then, of course, there's going to be all these kind of other animals. So, for example, there would be, in some cases, something that would be governmental but would be decentralized. Like this project that I think we spoke about in the prep called SOV for the Marshall Islands, which is still to happen, but it's like it's a sovereign currency, but it is decentralized and it is driven by an algorithm rather than by a monetary policy. So the monetary policy is the algorithm. And so I think that we're definitely heading in that direction. I think we're definitely going to see some interesting plays from the likes of Facebook, right? So to start money at the end of the day, you know, our fund is called NFX because we focus on network effects, and the number one network effect phenomena that the humans have created is money, right? It is a network effect. It doesn't work if the network does not exist. The paper has the power of belief and the power of you being willing to take it and me giving it. And so to build money, you need to have a phenomenal network effect. The company with the strongest network effect out there right now in the West is Facebook. And so it stands that they have the best chance going at that. I think that the battle between them and the governments is something that's worthy of a whole different panel on, our governments are going to give up without a fight on something that is, I think, was named, one of the senators in one of the Libra discussions, I think said something like the biggest weapon, the strongest weapon of the US is not nuclear power, it's the US dollar. And so is somebody really going to give somebody else the power to own such a weapon versus having the governments of the strongest countries in the world own that, which I think is still an open question.
Okay, well, so that leads me to, you say things about Facebook doing pretty well with this. So who else do you think is doing it right in terms of attitude or innovation? What, sorry?
I didn't say pretty well. I didn't say that yet.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so who do you think is doing it right in terms of an attitude toward evolution of money or what they're doing? Thinking about a country, a company, a person, or is there anyone who's really messing it up?
All right, I'll go first. I think that's a pretty tough one. So I think basically there's a very easy way to determine that relatively tough question. And there's also a time component to it. We run a business that makes it easy to determine who's doing well now. So now it's Bitcoin. It's very clear. Of all the cryptocurrencies, it has the largest market cap. It's again near its all-time high, and it's got all this support from everybody in the world, basically, or from a lot of people in the world. And it's the most decentralized. We don't know who the founder is, etc. So I think right now this Bitcoin is the way. I think Facebook definitely, as Gigi have said, Facebook definitely has a lot of advantages, especially in terms of network effect, and that's really good that they're actually working on cryptocurrencies as well to expand this industry. I think a lot of the large tech companies have a really good chance as well. But at the same time, we've seen in the past that existing industry dominant players, they have a lot of legacy momentum, or they have a lot of drag. It's not easy for them to change direction. So a search giant have not become a social media giant, and can a social media giant become a fintech giant? We'll see. So there may be some new player. So from my perspective, in cryptocurrencies now, there's a very easy way to measure its market cap, and we can see that fluctuate on different markets, and we can track that totally transparently. So I guess we'll see over time.
Okay, Tim, you want to venture into that one?
Sure. It's well, I'm not going to do anyone the disservice of saying who's doing a bad job, but I'll highlight who I think is doing a good job, and I think it's everybody actually. When you look at where we started from, we've come a long way in a very short period of time. But I think earlier Gigi was right to highlight the differences. We are talking about a lot of different things here. We're talking about lots of different dynamics, different marketplaces, different types of use cases and usage areas. So the area that I'll focus on is central bank digital currency, because we do need, and we could get into a debate about nationalistic policies, and we can get into the sort of cross-jurisdictional debate between different economies. And that's probably above my mental capacity in terms of, I'm not an economist. I don't really understand it as well as maybe I could. But I do know that there's a wall of institutional effort now around the world trying to drive towards central bank digital currency, and that alone, and I'm not saying that's the answer. I do fundamentally believe in the crypto angle. I believe in Bitcoin as an asset class that's here to stay. And in fact, we just announced yesterday a major investment in Switzerland to allow banking institutions access to the crypto markets, which is now something which has become, I think, a standard fare that the institutional market wants to get in there, and certainly the high net worth world wants access to this asset class. But central bank digital currency is really wholesale markets. It's not a retail product. It's not something that we as individuals, as citizens, would necessarily hold in our wallets, as it were. it's something that really greases the skids of the extraordinary volume of trade activity and trading activity around the world. And the ability to have truly wholesale central bank issued digital currency is a huge element of the efficiency gains that hopefully we can all take advantage of. And when I think about that, I sort of think about it in two ways. One is within the capital markets themselves, there's clearly efficiency gains to be had. Certain intermediaries and roles will change. The way we've done things in the past are likely to change. And the second way I think about it is how does that accrue to society? And I think we always have to come back to that. How does that accrue to a better future for all of us? And if we're able to take out material costs in the institutional capital markets around the world, with CBDC as one of the elements which allows integrated trading and settlement, atomic trading and settlement, if you can actually make that work in a given marketplace, which is not always the case, then what you're doing is you're allowing for better capital formation. You're allowing for the society to get faster, better, cheaper access to capital, and that's a good thing for the global economy. So I think there's a lot of value in these steps. We've been working with the Swiss National Bank. We were delighted to produce a report last Thursday on our work with the Swiss National Bank. It looks very, very promising with the Bank for International Settlements. We anticipate doing next phases, which is the really exciting part, looking cross-border at different jurisdictions and trying to assess how that's going to work in a fluid world. And then, then you need venues, and we're even more excited today just to announce that along with our partners at SBI Digital Asset Holdings, a big powerhouse in Japan, another institutional powerhouse, that we're going to open a Singapore digital asset exchange. So the wheels are in motion to put in place digital market infrastructure that allows that central bank digital currency movement to finally take hold, give us those efficiencies, and allow better capital formation for society, which is a great outcome if we can do that by 2030.
Yeah. And Tim, actually, since you talked about your Singapore plans, CZ, so your company has a presence in Singapore. Do you have any plans to expand your footprint here or expand generally?
Yes, I mean, we absolutely want to expand our presence in Singapore. I think right now, Singapore is probably one of the most forward-looking countries in terms of adopting digital cryptocurrencies or blockchain currencies. And there's also a number of initiatives by banks here in Singapore looking at exchanges, security token exchanges, etc. So yeah, we're definitely looking forward to that.
Okay, and Gigi, what do you think as someone who invests in companies and knows the startup scene well?
Yeah, so I think that I'll break it down into a bunch. I think that the question is who's going to do better as governments and who's going to do better as companies. And I think it's kind of a bit in reverse, because I think that the governments, for that to work, the more powerful the government is vis-a-vis the population, the easier the implementation is going to be. And so when you look at any government that can come and say, this is it, and we can think about a few, some of them are larger than others, then the implementation of their central bank digital currency is going to be fairly easy and fairly fast. And in that regard, for example, I think that, without knowing the details, just from looking from the sidelines, China is going to have a good go at that because it's relatively easier for China to dictate. I think that when it comes to places like the United States, we're going to see a lot of maybe even public unrest around it, given that a lot of it comes with basically replacing convenience for privacy, which is a big issue, right? At the end of the day, the existence of central bank digital currencies is going to come with the disappearance of cash. Usually, that's the purpose. And as cash disappears, you're basically giving up on a lot of privacy for the consumer. We can talk about that at length. And so I think that that's going to be tougher. So that's on the country's side. On the company's side, it actually appears to be right now the other way around, which is the stronger the company is and the stronger it is positioned to do well, the more objection and resistance it's getting from governments. And so we've seen Telegram, right? And we've seen some of the concerns and the pushback that Facebook got, where the product that's being launched eventually, I think, is fairly different than the initial product that Facebook had in mind. Much more limited, with much more control. And so I think that in that regard, actually, just as as Cesar said before, that there is a legacy and a drag for older companies, I think there's also more regulatory focus on these large companies, which is going to make it much tougher for them to succeed in this field. And so, if anything, I would expect that there's a chance that smaller companies are going to do much better when it comes to kind of sneaking under the radar and then growing fast. The last thing is that while the only thing that clearly works today on large scale is Bitcoin, the one area where I'm not a big fan of, because I think the governments are moving faster than what people expected in general, is single currency stablecoins. And I think that single currency stablecoins in a world where governments are going to be moving, if it's a basket, that's one thing. If it's a single currency, I see this becoming redundant very, very fast.
Interesting. Okay, and let's take it from kind of the corporate or government level for a minute to the individual. So what do you all think is kind of the biggest disruption for individuals, or what's going to be the biggest change for them in the next 10 years? Gigi, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, so I think that, as I said before, the big trade-off here is between convenience, because at the end of the day, it's going to be convenient, it's going to be cheap. I'll say something about it in a second, versus privacy. So at the end of the day, when you move to no cash, all digital central currency, we're talking about theoretically a full Big Brother environment, where every small transaction is monitored, where everything is accounted for, and where you can't really decide that you want to buy the product you shouldn't buy. And I'm not talking now about criminals. I'm talking about things that you just don't want other people to know about, or you don't want the government to know about. And I think that this is going to be where a lot of the concerns are rising and will continue to rise. That's on that side. On the other side, I think that when it comes to convenience, when it comes to ease of use, and when it comes to services being cheaper on the financial services side, this is a huge gap. I think that in a world where most of my money is digital, then maybe the central bank's wallet is good enough for me. I don't need a bank. And clearly, I don't need a TransferWise or Western Union if I want to transfer money, because that's kind of inherent into the product at zero cost. And maybe many of the other products that I want, I get as kind of DeFi derivatives of the money that I hold in my wallet, rather than anything else provided by anybody normal, traditional. And so I think that overall, other than the privacy concerns, this is all going to be a very good move for the consumers. And so we just need to balance that convenience and that reduction in cost and ease of use with not losing all privacy, which I think is wrong. One of the concepts that I've been playing around with is having sort of a minimal threshold for reported transactions. So basically, everything, say, you buy something for under the $200 that doesn't need the equivalent, doesn't need to be reported. Everything above that is reported, because at the end of the day, the bigger transactions today are also non-cash. And as you look at the breakdown of cash versus criminal activity, then the larger the sum that's used in cash, usually the higher the propensity it is illegal or problematic activity. And so maybe we put a threshold of, I don't know, and maybe that's a way to solve it. But I think this is the only conflict. Other than this conflict, this is a very positive move for consumers.
Okay, CZ, what do you think about that?
I think Gigi is very right. He actually mentioned most of the points I actually want to talk about. But I think I want to focus on like 3 keys. I think number 1 is security and ease of use, or ease of use while maintaining security. I think so. I think all of the factors that Gigi talked about are very important. But today, for mass adoption to happen, the normal average people are not able to hold cryptocurrency or Bitcoins securely themselves. There's not an easy way for them to do it. I think the normal mass adoption guys are not thinking so much about privacy and all these more advanced issues just yet. I think those issues are very important. But I think ease of use and at the same time being very secure is very, very important. Computers are not secure. Most of our electronic devices are not secure enough to hold cryptocurrency. So I think on that front, we need to improve quite a lot to get the mass adoption happening. I think once that gets going, once we solve that kind of problem, the next factor is price. I think low cost of use. Either you're sending money to your friend, sending money to your business partner across the world, or just trading actively on exchange. I think low cost is one of the keys. So at Binance, we try to aim at the lowest cost possible anywhere we do business. So that's sort of the three things we focus on today. Whereas I do think privacy is really, really important. I personally view privacy very strongly, but I think the mass consumers don't really have a strong sense of that just yet. In the US, people probably do. But if you look at China, China's a total surveillance state. Like China, the law enforcement have total control over information, including your chat logs, including your transaction logs on all of the major platforms in China. And people don't care about privacy. So different parts of the world, people react a little bit differently. But I think overall, right now, for the industry to grow much more, we need to solve I believe we need to solve the ease of use and security issues first.
Okay. And Tim, what do you think?
Well, look, it's an interesting question, right? I think if you look at the origins of the Bitcoin movement and the sort of decentralized element of it, in some respects, I think it's fair to say that the original promise hasn't held to some extent. And let me explain what I mean by that. And I think CZ was making the point very, very well, and I agree with everything Gigi said as well. But the completely decentralized nature of Bitcoin, or its original formulation, ended up not really being quite like that. There are lots of centralized pieces of that puzzle in the Bitcoin world, and no matter how libertarian or purist you get about the importance of decentralization, it's still large swathes of centralized infrastructure that make it work. And it's usually because you need that level of infrastructure to reach mass adoption. And that ultimately, as retail consumers, as society members that we all are, it's actually a fairly small percentage of society that has the technological know-how, as CZ says, to secure your own assets. So you end up with something that isn't quite decentralized. And if you look at Bitcoin now, there are many solid companies that have come up, and yeah, the Big Brother, this Orwellian question that is now real. This is very real. The Orwellian question of 1984, like we're living it right now. The technology is there to sort of to facilitate that kind of surveillance. And in Bitcoin, you can actually follow up and follow the breadcrumbs and actually find a fair old trace of what's going on, and that's what government agencies have been focusing on. So what is it really all about then? If that didn't quite work as expected, but provided lots of extraordinary benefits that I think society is already taking advantage of and will only continue. To be clear, I'm a supporter of that so-called DeFi movement, but I think the real DeFi needs to stand up, and it's not about decentralization or centralization. It's not that's neither here nor there whether things are centralized or decentralized. That's a means to an end. The real end, and this goes back to the core of your question, Joanna, of what about society? What does that mean for us as people? We want democracy. We want democratized finance. That's what this is all about. And I would put under that banner, I think most of what Gigi said and what CZ said. This is about faster, better, cheaper, secure, and private. Like that's what we want as people. That's what we demand. And the question is, what's the infrastructure that's going to allow that to happen at scale? And it's unfortunately not putting it in the power of the vast number of people in the world who don't have the skills or knowledge or experience or money to be able to secure that themselves. So are we going to see some really exciting new developments with big companies? I would hope Facebook and some of the other big technology companies take a role in that, but those startups that come up that create a new paradigm that allow us to have the right balance of centralization and decentralization, but ultimately powers a democratized financial system. That's what we all really, really want. We all, for our core, we want to get rid of the dark side. We don't want to see a crime. We want to be protected from investor protection is at the core of most of regulation. So how do we maintain that? And it's a very complicated story. I don't have the answer, but I know democratized finance is what we really want.
Okay. So actually, Tim, I'll go to you first with this next one. So do you think the financial industry is doing enough to prepare for this? Fidelity is getting into crypto, and we have the JPM coin, for instance. Do you think the financial industry is on the right direction, or do you think they might still get caught flat-footed?
Depends who you are. I think there's with any, and look, I've been involved in this movement since before 2015. I really had no idea what blockchain and Bitcoin were. A trip to visit Coinbase and Ripple in March of 2015 turns out changed my life, and I saw the light. The coin dropped, as it were, pun very much intended. And so my initial view as someone who's operating in institutional financial services was, how can this change institutional capital markets? That's where I've spent my career, and that's what I know. And since then, for 5.5 years, you've seen a steady movement from the biggest financial institutions, the regulators, the central banks, the technology companies. And it's an interesting dichotomy. On the one hand, I would say we should all be very, very proud within that industry of how far we've gotten in a relatively short period of time. Most institutions are focused on this, are putting resources on this. Most regulators and central banks have really kind of leaned into this, some of them more than others. And I think Singapore is a great example. Switzerland's a great example, and there are others. But the flip side is, I'd also say, well, we can do more. We need to be kind of charging more. There are some entrenched positions in institutional financial services, that dominant 20th century logic, which is quarterly profits and shareholder primacy, which I think is a flawed model. It actually results in a very defensive posture from a financial services industry that really should be a little bit more open and should be looking to disrupt itself. So I think you can do more. I for one, I'm the reason I'm at SIX, which is very much a traditional financial market infrastructure player, and like many of the others, has been looking at the space, has really taken that bold move of saying, all right, we're going to disrupt ourselves. We're going to look at it on our 10, 15-year horizon. We're going to put a lot of money and time into this, and we're going to be a first mover. And I think we need more of that. I think we need more of that spark. I think we need the big institutions to take a kind of a leading role. But it's also to do it in a collaborative way, because the old 20th century, adversarial model, it doesn't really work. It kind of sucks. Let's move to that new 21st century model where the ecosystem benefits, everybody benefits, all rising tide lifts all ships. So sort of a balance there, Joanna. So in some respects, great progress, in some respects, not good enough.
Okay. So CZ, can you give us maybe one or two big takeaways of what we should expect? 2 minutes. What are you thinking about? What's your big picture on this?
Yeah, I think, well, basically crypto is going to be everywhere in the next 10 to 20 years. So that's for sure. So, and I think if you look at that kind of horizon, it's very clear. We think the shorter horizon is a little bit harder to get, but we are kind of like in the 1995s of internet stage. That e-commerce is coming, video conferencing is coming, but it took many years to get there. But so this is a much bigger impact of technology because this internet impacts the data, and this impacts financial industries. So I think this will have a much larger impact on the world. But I think everyone should get ready for it and should learn about it and get on with it. So the earlier you adopt, the better. I think to answer your first question, I personally think that most of the traditional financial industry companies today are not ready for this change. They're very well equipped for this change. So most of them are not ready. I think what Tim said is very true. Most of them are still in this quarterly reports, earnings call mentality where they're kind of on a treadmill. They just got to run faster on the existing treadmill. They're not thinking about other landscapes. So I think most of there's only very few traditional organizations I see today that are actually embracing cryptocurrencies and blockchain, and those guys will likely do well. So yeah, I think the earlier people get into this industry, learn about it, the better. Last point is when you get into an early industry, you got to do risk management. I do not recommend everyone to push all in on one single digital currency, and then the price fluctuates, and then they're kind of stressed out. So put in what you can risk tolerate, and do risk management. So that's kind of my sort of takeaway.
Okay, great, thank you. Tim, just briefly, a couple of takeaways that you think, big picture.
Well, I think there's been a lot of great points made on this panel, and I think we're all broadly aligned. You know, let's move faster and let's not be slaves to the past. And I use this term dominant logic a lot because I think it's something that really matters. Like, everybody has to snap out of it and recognize that there's a really significant movement happening here, which has the potential. If you look at, and I think, CZ, you're right, you're mentioning kind of that internet moment. I think if you really think about what the internet is versus what blockchain and digital assets and cryptocurrency represents, it's an order of magnitude of potential impact vastly bigger than what we saw with the internet. That was a very unidimensional data exchange play, that it really democratized the data exchange element, and that's been transformative in many respects to many industries. But think of what this mutualized processing layer, which is what blockchain represents. Think of these new currencies, this new value exchange mechanisms, which are now starting to become very mainstream. When you've got Fidelity and companies like Six, you're providing that sort of service, that you've hit the mainstream. And I think the point I'd finish on is precisely kind of to underline CZ's point, which is, in 1995, we had no idea what was coming. We knew it was important. I think a lot of people got in early, but nobody could have conceived of some of the new business models that eventually came out and took maybe 10, 15, in some cases 20 years to come out. That's the way we should see this point in time. We don't know what's going to be there 10 years from now, but we know we've got to be involved, and we need the brightest and best to get in there and drive things forward. So everybody needs to get on the train because it's leaving the station.
Very nice, thank you. Okay, Gigi, your big picture, give us the kicker.
Yeah, so I'll just go, your question on fintech organizations. I think that I did a lot of studies on what got big companies to die, and speaking to one of the Blockbusters board members many years ago, and I asked him how come they let Netflix eat their business. And they said, we were afraid to move digital. We had the plan, but we were afraid to move digital because we thought that's going to cannibalize our core business in the shopping malls. And what I said, well, so instead of eating your own lunch, you let somebody else eat it. And he looked at me and said, well, I guess that's true. And that's exactly what I think is happening to financial organizations. All of them are playing hedge. You see this by the fact that most of the blockchain, of the cryptocurrency blockchain projects in these banks still belong to the innovation departments. They don't belong to the core lines of businesses. It's still something that you do so that you can say that you did it. And I think that when you look at every component of what a bank does, everything from keeping our money, helping us transfer it, helping us convert it, helping us save it, helping us, everything that they do is going to be disrupted by digital currencies, cryptocurrencies. And I think that the fact that they're so slow in it is going to be the end of many of them. And so, you want one prediction is that banks that will not move this into their mainstream and be willing to give up on a lot of their revenues right now for the sake of securing their future will end up without a future. That's one thing. I think that on the kind of predictions for the consumer side, I think that we are having digital currencies coming. It's not a question of are we, it's a question of when. I think many of them are going to be government driven. I think that privacy is going to be a huge issue. And I think that for most people, sadly, this is, for most individuals, this is like being a pawn in the game. They can't really impact that much. They just need to get ready to use it and take advantage of it whenever they can. I think that for businesses, for fintech businesses, not being on top of it is basically committing suicide. And I think that for most other businesses, not understanding how this will be part of their business in the future is basically giving up on a huge strategic advantage that they could have.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Gigi, Tim, CZ. Really great discussion. And thanks everyone for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. Thanks everyone for watching.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, specifically CZ, Tim, Gigi, and as well as Joanna as well for leading the session earlier today. I think it was a very, very, very insightful conversation. I think it gives us a lot to think about where essentially digital money, just these two words, digital money, as simple as it sounds. We probably learned these two words, when we were 7 years old or lesser or something like that. It's just carries so much weight, especially of where the world will go in the next 10 years. I think not just Gigi, but I think CZ brought up a very valid point that, you always have to think about tomorrow, but you also have to have, one eye on tomorrow, one eye on the future, like way future, right? And I think having that 10-year plan, and I think in businesses, you must always have, that good mix, somebody who's that visionary who looks 10 years, but you also need that person that essentially looks for the next 10 days or 10 months, literally, right? It's on that note, actually, and that's why I think the next few topics which we're going to be breaking down over the next couple of days, once again, Blockshow's sessions as part of the Singapore Fintech Festival focuses a lot on the blockchain and cryptocurrency industry. That's traditionally what Blockshow represents as well.